Three quite diverse but fantastic presentations there. We are, as I said, going to hone in on process optimization and look at kind of what point in drug development a firm needs to look towards process optimization and kind of how critical that is for the product's overall success. The first question I want to ask the panel is, it's going to sound quite simple. What is process optimization? For me, it's a term of phrase that has infiltrated this industry within the past 2-3 years. Before that, people weren't really talking about it. So I guess, what does it really mean to you, and why has it suddenly entered the mainstream of parlance within this space?
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, yeah. I can take that first. I think, inherently process optimization is anything that improves the process, typically from a cost perspective. And the reason it's entered into this market is because we're now at a stage where optimization is important, right? It didn't matter in the beginning because I'll go back to monoclonal antibodies. When they were first developed in the 80s, it was such a new thing. The cost didn't matter. If it could save this person's life, wow. It's kind of like where cell and gene therapy is right now, right? Cost doesn't matter. It's amazing. But we're going to get there with cell and gene therapy, and we're getting there now with monoclonal antibodies. That optimization is important because medicine can't be affordable without it.
So kind of industry's blown away by these therapies, and the cost is kind of a second thought, right? Andy, what are your thoughts on process optimization and when it sort of appeared?
Yeah, I mean, the cost driver has been a significant thing. We always hear about the cost of protein A, for example, and how that's one of the major contributions, but it does provide the quality that you need. But I think, as everyone knows, healthcare, the budgets for healthcare are not constantly being met, so that you need to make drugs cheaper. And I think that's the key to getting it right, getting the right yields, getting the right quality, but at the right cost.
So really, like everything in the world, it's all about money.
It's about money, absolutely.
Eric, your annual report covers pretty much every aspect of the industry. When did you kind of see some of your respondents focus on improving processes, or has it been a constant thing?
It's actually been evolving. Like Kelsey was saying, in the early days, they just needed to not die. But over the last probably 10 years that we've been asking a question: what's the single most critical trend or factor in bioprocessing? We found that year after year, at the top of the list is manufacturing efficiency, and it's just been going up and up. The reason is that goes to the issue of cost. Now we know how much it should cost to manufacture a biologic, a gram, cost per gram. We've done some analysis on where that is, and the fact that those costs are going down. In some cases, the statements coming from contract manufacturers are dramatic. If the average price is around $300 a gram, some contract manufacturers are talking about producing biosimilars for $50 a gram. And at the end of the day, but here's the point: at the end of the day, the difference between $50 a gram and $300 a gram is on the manufacturing budget. For an innovative drug, it doesn't even show up as a slice on the of the revenue pie. When you're talking about a biologic that may sell at $1 billion a year, the cost of manufacturing, to saving half the cost of manufacturing to the profitability of that supplier, it doesn't really matter that much. It matters to the manufacturer's bottom line, or the manufacturing department's bottom line. So, I mean, it becomes a big issue when you're talking about products like biosimilars, where costs do matter, and people are trying to drive those costs down so that we can cut the cost of a biologic in half, or like a small molecule, down to a dime on a dollar. But until we achieve those kinds of cost reductions, we're not going to see it. One of the other issues that we're seeing recently in the last few years is that the focus on manufacturing efficiency is actually, as a key trend, is actually going down. And the reason we think that the trend is that manufacturing efficiency is not being seen as a critical factor anymore is that it's not a trend anymore. By definition, a trend means something that's new and important. Now it's a way of life. So many of the manufacturers out there, and we've heard it from a number of facilities, they compensate their scientists on how much they can reduce the cost, so they can get a bonus if they can figure out steps that they can remove or process optimization that they can achieve. And so the scientists are actually being paid bonuses for being able to do that kind of stuff, which you'd never have heard, that would have been unheard of 10 years ago.
So obviously it still is used to reduce the cost of manufacturing, but what you're sort of saying is, as an overall cost, it can create a competitive marketplace when it comes to biosimilars and such, but as an overall cost of a development of drug, manufacturing is still reasonably small, right?
Yeah, but as the cost of a biologic goes down to the patient, the percentage of manufacturing cost is going to go up. So,
And so from a services point of view, is that the sort of thing you're seeing from some of your clients? Why the reasons why they're interested in some of the innovations and optimization elements that you bring?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially on the biosimilar side, where they've got an opportunity to improve the process and also reduce cost. So yeah, definitely the driver for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you also, with biosimilars, you also have another advantage because, it's kind of like, you don't have to use all the same ingredients in the biosimilar. You just have to have the same end product, right? And the same indication and the same drug effect. So we are seeing an opportunity as well for replacement of materials that could optimize, not just process-wise, but replacement of ingredients that could optimize the process. So it is an opportunity for innovation.
From the point of view of Rocket, you spoke in your presentation about the supply chain, raw ingredients. Does process optimization really start from raw material selection? Is that an area?
I would believe so.
Sure, but to what kind of extent would that be?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, and I'll go back to kind of the principles of QBD, where it all depends on what does your critical quality assessment tell you. What I challenge industry with is understanding what really is critical, and consistency is critical, and consistency goes back to the raw material selection. And so if you don't understand your supplier and the consistency that your supplier has, you could have problems within your process that you don't even know are there, right? You don't even have any fathom that they could be there. And so it doesn't come up in that critical quality assessment. So that's where I challenge that relation. And I know this because that's happened in small molecules, and now the relationship is there, but it's not quite there yet for large molecules.
And Andy, you're kind of in the downstream area there. How are you seeing process optimization play out?
Yeah, I think going back to quality, I think that's one of the things that we drive in our manufacture. So we've got, we manufacture resins in an ISO 7 environment, even though you don't need to. So we're trying to get as close as we can to GMP, but we don't make drugs, but we make raw materials that can make drugs. So that's really where we start, and we help customers do process optimization by contracting that out as well. So as much support as we can give them, really.
Our last panel discussion was actually on debottling bottlenecks. There's quite a big crossover there between the bottlenecks the industry has at the moment and this whole process optimization space. I'm just wondering some of the elements from the last discussion. We spoke about how the upstream received the majority of the attention when it came to solving problems and optimizing processes. Do you see a disparity between the upstream and the downstream when it comes to optimizing processes?
Yeah, it's the classic throw it over the wall, isn't it? and especially because, the yields they're producing upstream can cause problems downstream, either from impurities, as we spoke about earlier, but the sheer scale of what they're producing. I think Eric showed that it was like 10-fold increase in productivity. that causes more problems downstream that they have to cope with. So you need higher productivity resins, for example, or whatever it might be. So yeah, there's definitely a mismatch in terms of do they actually speak to each other and things like that. So
yeah, if you push something
yes,
in up, then it's going to pop up. Yeah,
yeah.
I
The problems move downstream, I think.
Eric, your views on the sort of difference between the upstream and downstream as far as optimization goes. Are we seeing problems solved in the upstream just for them to pop up in an even more problematic way in the downstream?
Absolutely, yeah. We can see it. You can see that over years the swing is where's your biggest bottleneck. Well, it's upstream. Recently, and over the many years, it's been downstream, and that bottleneck is not being solved. Part of the reason is when you do an analysis of titer improvement over time, over 30 years, we did a little analysis on how titers improved, and they went up. I don't remember what the numbers are, but it's a nice, pretty curve. In our annual report, we're seeing it flattening out at about, when we asked 200 bioprocessing experts what their titer is right now, and it's about 3.2. When we started measuring it was 1.9, 1.5, and that was like 5 or 6 years ago. You go back a few years and you're talking about 0.x. So I mean, it's really dramatically improved. On the other hand, the yield coming out of the bioreactor after purification, that is like stagnant at whatever it is, 68% or whatever it is, and it's just not moving year after year after year. So the industry is really, as they're seeing these improvements on the upstream side, now they can only scale out and put bigger, meatier stuff in as opposed to doing it better. So, and that kind of brings up another issue associated with raw materials, as Kelsey was saying. When you look at, for instance, the single-use technologies and plastics associated with single-use technology, where are the raw materials coming from and going way past back in the chain? Where is those slip agents coming from? Where is the silica even coming from? And the reason that they have problems in the single-use technology is when you simply look at the pie of how much plastic is consumed by the biopharma or pharma industry, it literally doesn't show up. You cannot see how much relative in a graph or a pie chart. It just totally swamps. So here you have little Amgen, or rather say Saint-Gobain or Thermo coming in and saying, well, we want you to change the way you do business with us as a buyer, telling their suppliers when how to change their their change management and so forth, and thou shalt not make a change in the plastic. It will never happen in an industry as massive as the plastics industry. I don't know whether or not it would happen with amino acids or other media supplements, but to what extent can a little biotech like Amgen, who's using a zillion grams of this stuff, but in the scale of things, it's like doesn't show up again. How can they tell them how to?
I'd love to comment on that.
Yeah, Kelsey, please do.
Yeah. No, I think you have a great point, Eric, and I think that's the challenge I'm putting to the industry, because there are suppliers that do pay attention, but it's a matter of making sure that those suppliers are involved in your supply chain. And I've come from a long chain of different excipient companies, and every time that's kind of the relationship you build with pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical companies is all around that quality you give. And it goes both ways, right? It's a long-term partnership, and it's just starting in biopharmaceutical. It's there in small molecule, but you're right. It goes all the way back to the material manufacturers of not just the raw materials of the ingredients going in, but the plastics, the resins, the equipment, everything. So it's complex, and so I can understand why it hasn't gotten there yet, but we're on the cusp of it. I can feel it.
Andy, you're nodding your head. I assume that's in agreement. Interesting thought there, though. As far as for monoclonal antibodies, we have, in the US and Europe, we have healthcare systems that have provided a plan for these to be funded. As Eric said before, the cost of goods is kind of marginal as far as the final price of biologics goes to a certain extent. Therefore, the idea of process optimization, is this like when the iPhone 10 comes out? It's marginally better than the iPhone 9, but the folks at Apple tell you that you need to get this. It's going to improve your life and everything else. Is it really? Could this be contrived at all as a bit of a marketing spiel from some of the vendors? And as we have kind of two folk here.
I'll comment on that too. Yes and no. I mean, I think you've got a really hard case if you're trying to go to a company and say, change your process because I've got this new ingredient. If it's an established drug and it's a blockbuster, and I mean, there's no way they're changing their process. It doesn't make sense. But when it comes to biosimilars, there is absolutely an opportunity for that. So I think it just depends. And so it goes back to, at what part of the process is it important to engage raw material suppliers? And I think that it's that early stage. Because otherwise, I agree with you. It doesn't make that much sense because the cost savings aren't there for the amount of work you have to do. But if you find the cost savings at the beginning, that's where the gold is.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, it's got to be a significant improvement as well, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You can't do a few X%. So, and it's down to the suppliers to actually demonstrate that we can improve in one field or another. To actually make it a benefit of change, especially in a regulated environment. The cost of changing, often prohibits even a slight improvement. So it's got to be a significant change to make a difference.
And sorry, Eric.
We deal with innovative companies all the time. Somebody with a great brain bubble that is going to revolutionize alternatives to protein A or whatnot, and or dramatically increase optimize the media that would be used, and then you ask them something like, well, what's in it? Well, buckyballs or something like that, weird. And you go, well, it works, and it's just growth everywhere, but you can't get the buckyballs out or whatever it would be. And so you get a lot of innovative technologies that will come in, but very often companies don't realize that at the end of the day, the decision makers at the biopharma are going to ask a simple question, which is, what are the regulators going to say about this? So, we've seen examples where people have stuck with roller bottles for years and years because they don't want to have to deal with the regulatory fallout. So, the issue is, has this seen, the story is always, has this product seen human contact before? And if the answer is no, then they're going to say the difference is a incremental, well, if it has, then, is it going to improve us, 10%? Or is it going to improve our productivity 200%? If they're going to be the trailblazer, they don't want to do it with their product on their regulatory dime.
So, I mean, really, as Kelsey actually said, you've got to kind of optimize your processes early on. And as you just said there, why would a firm in late stage or even commercial try and or bother trying to optimize or change their process? But I'm wondering if there would ever be a case for such a firm to look back at their production process and make significant changes once a product is commercial. Andy, sorry, you're nodding your head.
Yeah,
viciously.
I mean, we've got specific examples. I mean, it may be if you look at a chromatography resin, but at the stage the process was developed, they didn't have a caustic stable resin, for example, and getting a resin through the regulatory bodies that you can't use caustic, which is a very established cleaning in place process. If resins have developed that then allow caustic stable, then the cost of that change is definitely worthwhile because it eases their flow through the regulatory bodies. If they can say, well, we can now clean it with caustic, so we haven't got to use pepsin or some sort of magical formula to clean the resin. So, and we've seen that, a real example of that happening.
We've seen the innovation happen that quickly, within a product's life cycle, for a marketing MNAA holder to actually change its process.
So we're working one particular client who've done exactly that. So. and it was worthwhile doing it.
Oh, right. So it is. And then Kelsey, you're nodding there as well. So
Yeah, no, and we've seen the same in processes. So when a drug product launches, it doesn't mean it's perfect, right? So we've seen companies that have problems with lyophilization, for example, and still need to find a solution to make sure that the stability of their drug can withstand so much time. So that I think that there is still opportunities in late stage. Because it's not all perfect when it launches. The drug companies, especially if it's big and it really is helping save lives in a way that has never been done before, it gets to market fast and they optimize after.
go on, Eric.
Just a real quick comment on that. I think it would be a really interesting study, and maybe somebody's done it, to identify what kinds of late stage changes have actually been made. What's the probability of those changes being made, and what's the impact limit before somebody says yes, we have to make that change? We had heard anecdotally from a number of companies that we are totally willing to make a change at phase 3 or even commercial scale, but we never, actually quantified that. And I mentioned that to a very, very large biopharma. And I said, it's actually happening. And their quality VP almost bit the back of my neck off. Said, no, it never happens. And I'm thinking, okay. That's,
it's a difference between a perfect product and an acceptable product. For a pharma company, could be billions of dollars, and acceptable is acceptable. But that takes us back to what we were saying earlier. When there's biosimilar competition or when there's a direct threat, then maybe a relook at some of the processes to be able to compete might be optimal for a firm. Would that be? Have we seen that at all? Have we seen any innovators do that when competition
or
comes
I would say even what we have seen is a lot of manufacturers moving their drug products to different regions. And I'll take China as an example. After Eric's great presentation, there's a number of drug manufacturers moving their manufacturing from US, Europe to China to try to capitalize on the market there. And so I think anytime you're moving a process, you also have that opportunity, because now, the biopharmaceutical companies are looking, okay, does it make sense? Does our supply chain still make sense? Do we have to make some changes? What does that mean? Can we optimize? As long as we're making the change, can we optimize along with doing that? So I think they also take advantage of different market opportunities to do the optimization process.
Oh, that's really interesting, the whole geographical change as a process optimization element. Eric, obviously, your Chinese, your presentation on China, you've seen quite a lot there. Have you seen firms eyeing up the China biomanufacturing space to transfer their product there at all?
Well, some of that activity occurred strategically, 15, 20 years ago, when companies like AstraZeneca and others started to establish relationships in China with their R&D facilities, knowing full well that that's how you start your business. So if they're doing R&D there and they're hiring, they're doing what's necessary, which is training, domestic, people to become experts within that environment, and that's necessary to take it to the next level. So, is it possible for a newcomer biologics company to say we're going to now just put bricks and mortars in China? I think the answer is yes. Obviously, there's many examples of that, but I think right now there's a lot more interest in developing partnerships, and a lot of the biopharmas, we saw on the slide there, the 100 plus biopharma companies are seeking inbound investment on innovation, so that they can find that innovation and bring it to China in a partnership level. So much of the innovation in terms of developing those collaborative approaches is occurring in a more complex way. It's not like Pfizer dropping their a GE QBio facility there in developing a drug there. That, I think, is proof of concept that it can be done. But the reality is, I think we're going to see a lot more collaborative, innovative, relationship-built opportunities in China. And that is going to rely a lot on, I think, the development of a domestic industry. I think I mentioned that I saw a bag manufacturer at Interfex, the first one I had seen, from China exhibiting at Interfex this year, few weeks ago. Never seen that before. So I think what we'll see moving forward is increased innovation on not just the side of the biologics, but also on the supplier side as well. And supplier also goes to the raw materials. Frankly, it's a whole lot easier to sell a raw material than it is a complex bioreactor, for instance.
So when I'm thinking 20 years ago of the small molecule firms, or 30 years ago, there was a kind of flight to lower cost economies, China and India specifically there for their drug production. We're not really going to see that with biologics. If the innovation is actually coming out of China, China's not going to be viewed as a low cost manufacturing opportunity for Western companies.
No, I don't think so. I think I think it's going to be an issue of quality. You know, when you're talking about a small molecule, you can say this is comparable. This is a generic to this, or this raw material analyzes to that. But in a biologic, it's like saying, you know, you're making wine, right? This red wine is exactly like this Bordeaux we bought for $100 a bottle in France. No, it's not. I mean, it's red and it smells like it, and the alcohol and you know, you do a spectrography on it and it looks the same, but no, it's not. There's something different. You can't put your finger on it, and I think that's the same in biologics. You're going to see a requirement of a quality system in place before we start to see that environment grow into one that really can meet not just the early stage raw material issues, but also you know, grow it into a global opportunity for the manufacturers. By the way, not just in China, but everywhere around the world. Let's face it, biologics in particular, pharmaceuticals specific also, but biologics in particular is really a global industry. So for us to think of it in domestic and non-domestic terms, I think is probably short-sighted.
I guess that's the opening up of the Chinese markets helped us not think of it in those domestic silos.
Yeah, we're seeing an environment where it's not just China, but it's also India and elsewhere.
Yeah.
The companies are growing as a result of they're going to have an advantage in maybe market access. China might have an advantage in market access. Somebody in France or in Germany or the US might have an innovative product that they think may have a greater market because there's more incidence or prevalence in China for a particular therapeutic. And therefore it makes logical sense to go into an environment that might be 10x or even 100x the size of your own domestic market. So many of these innovations, I think, are going to move as a result of recognition of the broader objective opportunities that exist.
I guess my final topic area that I'd like to discuss briefly, unless anyone has any burning questions now, is something we touched on before, sort of new modalities, cell and gene therapy specifically, and the pressure, as we said, of reducing the cost of goods there. Now we're talking about that now, and it's such a early stage industry. I'm too young to remember the monoclonal antibody space when it was first blossoming, and I'm not going to imply that anyone here is old enough too. But I'm wondering if we had the whole furor about the high cost of goods and the high prices that they that occurred at the time, you know, in the 80s, and if we're seeing that replicated with cell and gene therapies today. Andy, you're nodding your head, but that doesn't imply you were like I'm not commenting on your age.
No. Well, I think that the difference with a lot of the gene therapy is actually personalized medicine. So you can't make a bulk drug that fits everyone.
Right.
And I think that's the key difference. So how can you make it cost effective to have the purification next to the patient and a single dose goes straight into them? And that's the big challenge, I think. So yeah, I mean, you've got to have a technology that's flexible enough to purify the product, but it's got to be cheap enough or cost effective enough to actually be able to do on a very personal level. And because each drug therapy in effect is different because it's for the individual, then how do you get a platform technology that works as well?
I guess that's why there's a pressure to get that platform
exactly.
or solve that problem
exactly.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah, exactly.
Kelsey?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the volume is a challenge there for the industry because there's so much, especially when you go all the way back to the raw material suppliers, that tends to be a raw material supplier mindset, right? But if you think about it, when monoclonal antibodies first started, they weren't really focused on the quality of their products, right? They like literally if you look at the ingredients that were used in some of the very first monoclonal antibodies, I mean, they were just kind of like ingredients you can buy off the internet now, right? That it wasn't even a thought in their mind that what the quality of ingredients, it was all about the process. And so I think you'll see something similar with gene therapy as they start going through how do we make this real? How do we deal with this volume issue? And then start thinking about, okay, well, now how do we make sure this is cost effective? I think there's a lot of innovation that can happen because one of the biggest problems with cell and gene therapy is the personalized medicine, but also the transportation, right? So there's a lot of innovation happening around that transportation piece that just hasn't really been done before, and is prime for innovation.
I guess finally, Erica, some of the respondents to your survey, are they standing up and shouting their concerns with these new modalities
Cell
already?
and gene therapy, yeah, that's a very interesting area and probably one for an entire meeting. Yes, the issues that we've seen they start with, I don't know if any of you saw the 60-minute segment from that NIH had about maybe a month ago, describing the gene therapy that cured. They use the cure word. NIH doesn't do that. They use the cure word for sickle cell anemia. So when you start to talk, when NIH is saying we have a cure for a disease that affects millions, and it's debilitating, that raises, what that does is it raises the awareness that gene therapy and cell therapy are not just concepts. All of a sudden you get all sorts of investors crawling out of the woodwork saying, "Oh, I want a piece of that." And so when we've done the surveys of biopharma contract manufacturers for cell therapy, or even the cell therapy or innovators themselves, we find that many of them don't have a clue how they're going to commercialize. They just don't know. They figure, and you see how those two tie together. What they've done is they said, we're going to prove the technology in clinic. Once we got that, then the investors will come crawling out of the woodwork. And sure enough, it's very likely what's happening. And when we see Paragon, the price that Paragon just captured, that's an example of where we're seeing multipliers that are based on what gene therapy is likely to do. And when you have that kind of money, you're going to be able to solve things like, how are we going to purify cells that don't like heat? Stuff like that. So I suspect that anybody involved in gene therapy right now is probably pretty excited.
So these processes, they're going to be fine-tuned in the well, I guess relatively near future if you compare it with antibodies, right?
Yeah, I think all of the large manufacturers have their cell therapy groups that are nominally working on it. A year ago, which in cell therapy terms is like forever ago, the complaint was none of the vendors are talking to us about how we can develop real cell therapy dedicated bespoke equipment and in order to be able to ultimately commercialize. And I think now we're starting to see that the industry, the vendors in the industry are now saying, okay, we got proof of concept. We're gonna take some of that big bucks we're getting from monoclonals, plow that into the R&D for this. We'll buy a couple of companies that we got a billion here, a billion there, and we will be truly the innovator for that area.
That'd be very interesting to see. On that note, unless there are any questions, oh, there we go. You shout it.
Okay, so the question is, how do you see the political climate from US, China?
So we're talking
Okay.
the political climate between the US and China. Oh,
Let's
so
start
political,
with,
the political climate on.
Yeah. Let's start with the political climate, and I think we'll make that real quick. We've got two people in China right now, and my director in China asked me that very question. So even though she is exceptionally well versed about pharma in the U.S., having been trained in the U.S. as well in China, she knows this. But at the top of mind is how is the political environment going to affect investment, and how is it going to affect innovation? And it's been my experience, having seen a few monoclonal waves go through. I can say that this is a very long-term environment. So, a current political environment is, that's going to be a bump in the road, and ultimately down the road, things are going to significantly change, and they're going to be driven by things like healthcare policy. Nobody's going to say we're going to put a 3% tariff on your cell and gene therapy. They're going to say we got a cell and gene therapy, and it's going to be made available to millions who need it. That's going to, I think, likely to be the story, and not an issue of tariffs.
Anyone else want to comment on the political climate? No, I guess what you're saying, policy, policies change, presidents change, hopefully. And I think on that note, we will leave the panel at that point. And I'd like to thank our panelists, and I'd thank you all for listening to this session, and in fact to the Bioprocess International Theater at CPhI in North America. That's pretty much it for us this year. But we hope to be at CPhI North America next year with just as well a bustling, with some great presentations, some great topics, looking at bioprocessing and looking at biomanufacturing. And thank you so much. Thank you.